You're listening to episode 28 of Literacy in Color. Today, we're clearing up some misconceptions around MTSS with Dr. Stephanie Stollar. She is passionate about using MTSS as the framework for helping all students become skilled readers. She's also the founder of the Reading Science Academy, an online community where over 1,000 educators support each other to improve results in their schools. Spoiler alert, I'm a member and it's wonderful. Dr. Stollar also advises the next generation of education policy leaders in her role as an assistant professor at Mount St. Joseph University. She's served as a vice president at Acadience Learning, providing training and consultation to hundreds of school districts. She's worked as an assistant professor of school psychology and as a school psychologist. Dr. Stollar believes that by supporting all educators, high achievement is possible for every student. Without a doubt, you are going to find her insights in this episode extremely helpful. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Literacy in Color. Today, I am joined by a true literacy expert, Dr. Stephanie Stollar, and it is a joy to have her on the show today. She is founder of Reading Science Academy, of which I am a member, as many of my colleagues in the literacy realm are as well. It is truly a wonderful community filled with people on all different places on their literacy journey, from some of the researchers in the field to people just starting out. And it is such an honor to have Stephanie here because she has built that community for us. She does a lot of work in the science of reading realm in terms of consulting and professional speaking, and she is just so well versed in this world. And if you think about MTSS, she is the queen of that. And we are going to be talking about MTSS today, but more importantly, we are going to be talking about the confusions that lie around the framework. So first of all, welcome to the show, Stephanie. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
I know you're a woman who needs no introduction, but for those who haven't heard of you, would you briefly introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background as it relates to the science of reading?
Sure. So I'm a school psychologist by training, and this is hard for people to believe, but everything that we now call the science of reading or the science of learning is what I learned as a graduate student. So everything that we talk about in terms of assessment and evidence-based instruction, intervention systems, systems change, supporting all students, working together in teams, those are all things that I was trained in originally as a school psychologist. And I've had an opportunity to use that information in a variety of ways over the years. I've worked as an assistant professor at a university, 2 different universities now. I have supported school districts to implement what we now call MTSS to improve reading outcomes as a consultant, as somebody who was working at the state level to help multiple districts make that transition. And that's work that I continue to do today. So I'm really fortunate to not have to make the shift or transition that many educators have had to from balanced literacy to a more structured literacy approach. So I'm not discouraged by still talking about the things that I've been talking about during my entire career. I feel like now's the moment for us to get this right.
That's so wonderful that you had that knowledge base from the get-go, and it really has honed in on who you are as an educator and the impact that you're making now, as a lot of people do have to make that transition in learning.
I think I have so much respect for teachers because I'm sort of a native to this information. I haven't had to make that change, and I recognize how hard that must be. So I feel like my role is to help people with clear and accurate information so that they can make that shift.
That's wonderful. A lot of people are grateful for you. I know this.
Thank you.
So, first of all, let's talk about MTSS in defining it. In just a sentence or two, are you able to give us a brief overview of what MTSS is in very simple terms?
Sure. So I think of MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, as school improvement. It is systems change, teams of educators using data to create the systems that every student in that school community needs to be successful. It goes beyond just reading. It includes all academic subjects and behavioral support for students. I just happen to focus in the area of reading and literacy.
Wow, that is a really concise way of understanding it. It is your whole system of how your school operates. And oftentimes people want to pin it as this is just our intervention model, but
yes,
this is how we run our operations. This is how we run our school. Can you get a little bit into the specifics about the tier model, and perhaps you can clear up some misconceptions that people have about the tiers of instruction?
Sure. So I'll go back to the origins. When I was in graduate school and when people were first starting to conceptualize this model, before we called it MTSS, in the, dare I say, late 1980s, some of the research that we talk about today was already known, and it served as the foundation for that tiered approach. It's based in public health. And it's based in the idea that we can promote positive outcomes for students. We can prevent difficulties. I think one of the most important findings in the research is the fact that we can prevent reading failure for just about every student. So the model is based on the idea that we should do that efficiently and not give more intensive resources or intervention when a less intensive solution would get the same result for students. So that's the depiction of the model as a triangle or a cone or a pyramid. Sometimes people talk about the idea that schools have limited resources. And although we can get every student to successful grade level reading, we can't provide intensive intervention to very many students because our resources are limited. So the depiction of the triangle shape represents those concepts that what we do with everyone should be so lined up to their needs. What we call that tier 1 or core reading instruction. Regular classroom reading instruction should be so powerful and effective and lined up to what students need that it minimizes the number of students who need something additional. So we depict tier 2 and tier 3 as extra doses of instruction. In addition to that very effective classroom instruction, tier 2 and tier 3 are interventions. Some schools talk about those as double dips. So if you picture an ice cream cone, to represent the idea that the interventions are not instead of the first dip or dose of instruction in the classroom, they are additive. They are added on to that first dip of instruction when students need something extra. So the fundamental understanding is that every student can be a successful reader, can reach those grade level reading expectations, but not with the same kind of instruction or the same amount of instruction. And we need to use our resources in schools efficiently to meet the needs of absolutely every student.
That was so helpful. I appreciate the juxtaposition to public health because you think about it, we lived in this society where everyone was on medications and needed hospital treatments. How taxing would the healthcare system be if that was the case? And when you compare that to education, it's the same thing. And yet it seems so normal to put all the children's in intervention, slap a label of special education on so many students when really we can hone in on that tier 1 instruction and make that stronger.
Yeah, a lot of folks are experiencing this exhaustion right now because some states have policies, districts have policies where they are requiring the first step to be intervention. And I understand that that's in response to schools perhaps not being responsive to students who are struggling and parents really pushing back on that, and rightly so. But I think we have taken the wrong approach to that. To me, the first response to universal screening, finding out who is a struggling or at-risk reader should be changes to curriculum and instruction, not jumping directly from screening to intervention in tier 2 or tier 3. Maybe you've had this experience, but in some classrooms that I work with, more students are leaving for intervention than are staying. More students in the grade level are at risk or struggling readers than not. So I think we need to pause and remember what the model is all about and not forget that our best opportunity to improve outcomes for students is what we do in the time where they are spending most of their reading day. And that's the regular classroom.
Absolutely. And I became a reading interventionist back in 2013. And I always remember at the beginning of the school year, teachers would just be like, these are your kids.
Mm-hmm.
I can't teach them. The gap is just far too wide in my classroom. I don't know how to address their needs. And it became this, our curriculum isn't teaching them, so I need you to take them. Mm-hmm. And it was this fight or flight mentality that they don't feel equipped to teach. But the truth is, if the system is broken, then the system needs to change. It's not that we just brush the children off to another person. So maybe we could talk a little bit about tier 1 and what are maybe some of the essential components of tier 1 and what can tier 1 ideally look like across a grade level in a school who's implementing an MTSS framework really well.
Well, I love to talk about tier 1. It's my favorite topic. But can I circle back to something that you said about when you were an interventionist, that teachers expected you to take their students and it was sort of your responsibility. I just want to acknowledge that that's by design. We've set teachers up to think that they don't have the expertise. In some cases, we haven't given them the expertise or the knowledge that they need to be effective with all students. And that starts in teacher training. We have silos in teacher training, the general education program or track within teacher preparation and special education. We train educators separately from the beginning. We tell gen ed teachers, you don't have the expertise. If a student is struggling, it's your responsibility to refer to those who have that expertise. So we've set it up in sort of a dysfunctional way from the very beginning. And I think we have to acknowledge that and tell teachers explicitly that can't work. If half of our grade level is struggling with below grade level skills, we have to do something different. And that involves equipping you with the knowledge, information, skills, materials, schedule, all of it that you need to be more effective with all of your students. Because maybe you've had this experience that you had sort of a roster of the number of students you could intervene with. And that was full by November, right? And yet there were still other students who needed intervention. And what happens over time is that those students don't get the help that they need. They go on to the next grade level. They fall farther and farther behind. And so that way of doing business wasn't serving our students well. It wasn't serving our teachers well. And so when I say systems change, those are the kinds of changes I'm referring to all the way to the level of teacher preparation, which is something that I'm up to my eyeballs in trying to influence right now.
That's so true. And you're right. My roster, I would always say I have to take the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I'm full.
And then everyone in between is just kind of in limbo. And it's very true. We need to equip our teachers, and the teachers need to be smarter than their programs in order to make instructional decisions that align to what the students in front of them need, truly being responsive to those students.
Yes. And universal screening is that innovation that allows us to know that from the very beginning of the school year. People as young as you don't remember the days before we had universal screening, but it was tough. We had to rely on the teacher to recognize a concern and then make a referral to a team. And we don't have to do that anymore. All of that just delays the process of getting help to the student. So now with universal screening, we know from the beginning of the school year, not just who's at risk, but the magnitude of the issue, the proportion of students who are at risk or struggling readers, so that our instructional systems, our tiers of support can be responsive, can be designed to meet those needs, rather than having to make those tough choices that you were referring to. Which students do I work with? Do I work with, people used to call them the bubble students, right? Do I work with the bubble students, or do I work with just the lowest? And it felt terrible to have some students you weren't supporting, or folks like you and special educators are so kind-hearted, you would give up your lunch and your prep period, and you would have groups of 12 students so that you could try to meet everybody's need. And many are still operating in that way, unfortunately. So I'm saying all these things to hopefully connect with the reality of where people are right now, still, to spark the discussion about doing things differently. Okay, so really that does lead into some description of Tier 1 instruction. So again, the primary purpose of classroom reading instruction should be to prevent reading difficulties in kindergarten and first grade for almost every student, and to reduce the number of students who need intervention in second grade and beyond. I don't think we talk enough about that is the purpose of classroom reading instruction. In fact, right now, there's a lot of conversation about that Tier 1 instruction in ways that are not helpful. I hear people talking about Tier 1 should be all whole group, or Tier 1 should be always only working on grade level standards, nothing else. Or we should use Tier 1 to expose students to that core curriculum. And unfortunately, most of those reading programs are all whole group. They are not designed in the way that we need them to be. So the first task, I think, and the first description of Tier 1 is that it is differentiated to meet the needs of all students. Every student is a Tier 1 student. Every student. Students identified as gifted, students with reading difficulties, even dyslexia, students with intellectual disabilities, multilingual learners. The Tier 1 instruction should be constructed and delivered in a way that matches what you just found out on screening every student in your grade level needs. So this means things like how much time should you spend on Tier 1 instruction? Do you need 90 minutes? Do you need 60 minutes? Do you need 150 minutes? That's a data-based decision based on your screening data, diagnostic data. How should you group your students? Whole group, small group, for which skills, which parts of that literacy block should be whole group and small group? Depends on your data. Who should be supporting the instruction if you are delivering different sized groups? Who are the other staff who are going to support that? What knowledge do all of the staff need to be able to provide that effective Tier 1 instruction? And what are the instructional routines and materials that are going to be used in Tier 1? So I hope I'm communicating that we have to get away from purchase a core program, deliver it out of the box, stick to a rigid pacing guide, implement with fidelity. All of these slogans that I hear people talking about are the exact opposite of what the MTSS model is designed to do. And it all rests on that solid Tier 1. So I'm interested in your thoughts and questions about that.
It's such an insightful way to think about it, because a lot of states are mandating curriculums. They have lists of these are the curriculum aligned with the science of reading, and schools are just jumping, purchase the curriculum, get trained in the curriculum, implement the curriculum. I'm still not seeing the results. The recent NAEP scores were so disheartening. In my circle, at least, it feels like a lot of teachers are doing the work and they're trying to implement evidence-based instruction and trying to move the needle. And we got these scores back and yikes, our schools are still not performing. Our students are still not performing. It tells you there's work to be done still, but it also tells you, like, are we making the right instructional decisions for schools that are saying that they're doing things aligned with the science? Are they making the right instructional decisions for their buildings? And when we think about differentiation, you think about core instruction. If you're just throwing the lesson at the students and teaching to the middle, your gifted students are bored.
Yes.
Your students who are below have no idea what you're talking about. Your ELLs have no idea what you're talking about. And you maybe just reached a small percentage of students in your lesson, and you wasted everyone's time.
Yes. It makes no sense when you stop and think about it. So I hear the same thing from teachers. They understand that this is not working. The most important part of the science is the outcome for the students, right? So we have to be more thoughtful than what's happening currently with some of the things you mentioned, these state or district approved lists of programs. Just because they say they are, quote unquote, high quality instructional materials, HQIM, does not mean that there is any evidence of that program working for anyone anywhere. And I think lots of district administrators make an assumption. Well, if it's on the approved list, it must be aligned with the research. That is not necessarily the case. So we have to be smart enough to know that. And then we have to be responsive enough to what our students actually need and not try to force our students to fit into an existing program. So I'm really pushing back on this quite a bit. And people raise their eyebrows when I talk about this. And, I said the other day, I've never been accused of being a rebel or a radical, but I feel like it sometimes these days that I'm saying things that are against the grain, against the norm. But when teachers are trying to do what you described, just teach to the middle, they realize it's not working. They can see it in the data. The NAEP data, as you mentioned, their own screening data in their school. They're trying to comply with the policies and mandates of their district, but they realize it is not working. So being scientific means looking at data, being responsive to data, and making changes if you're not getting the outcome that you're obligated to get for your students. So we have ways to go. There's a little course correction that we need to do in this area, I think.
Time for a detour.
Yes. We've gotten a little off track.
I know one of your teachings with MTSS for Tier 1 instruction is actually in sharing students across a grade level and not just one teacher trying to address every single student in their own classroom, but grouping students across the grade. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. That's the way that I first learned about reading instruction. Here's the big idea. Students make the most progress under a couple of conditions. When the instruction they receive is targeted to their current skill level. It's not something they already know. It's not over their head. So when instruction is targeted to their skill level, that happens most efficiently when they're grouped with other students who have the same skill need. The thing that they need to learn next is the same. It works best. Students make the most progress when they have an instructor who's knowledgeable, when they have a program that is aligned to the research, when there's some progress monitoring that allows the instructor to make those shifts in real time. So those conditions are maybe what we tend to think of in an intervention context. Nobody would think about doing whole group heterogeneous grouping for special education or for intervention, right? So all those characteristics are familiar to us with intervention. When we have universal screening data, we know the proportion of students in the grade that need intervention, right? So the other underlying principle is students who are behind are going to need more time. People talk about this as dosage, right? So number of intervention or instructional sessions each week or each day, the amount of time that's in this kind of instruction. So a way that we can build in more time and deliver instruction that meets these characteristics is by doing it during Tier 1, the ELA block, and also doing it during the intervention time of the day. So the idea of grouping across the grade level is just an efficient way of accomplishing the things that I've been mentioning so that all hands are on deck. Everybody who has a stake in reading outcomes is trained in the same instructional or intervention program, and they're pushing into the grade level so that students, as much as possible, are grouped based on skill. So we definitely don't want to ask teachers to be managing multiple small groups in their classroom. That's usually a disaster. As a teacher, I would not want to manage 6 different groups in my classroom. I would not want the rest of my class working independently while I'm with a small group. That is not helpful. So the alternative is this grouping across the grade level. It allows everybody to be engaged in delivering the instruction, every student, as much as possible, to be in a group with others who have the same next step for their instruction. And it allows us to give one dose of that good instruction during the ELA block and a second dose of it later in the day. Could be the second lesson of exactly the same program. Now, this works best for the word recognition skills within the simple view of reading. right? So I want to just constrain my comments to, I'm talking about phonics and spelling, phonemic awareness, text fluency, and reading comprehension, right? I would have different things to say about the language comprehension part of tier 1, but most of what we're identifying are word recognition issues. This is what's holding up even our older struggling readers. Underneath the reading comprehension problem is this decoding issue. So that format of grouping across the grade level is an efficient way to give students what they need in enough dosage that they actually move faster through the phonics scope and sequence and catch up to grade level. And the sooner we do this in every grade, the more effective we can be. And if we do this early, like in kindergarten and first grade, every student can leave first grade reading for meaning. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. So that's what I'm advocating for.
Yeah. And it's a whole philosophy shift. I know some teachers are like, I don't want to give up my kids, but
Yes.
you look at it as a greater good. These are our students in our school. This is
Thank
not
you.
just your kids. It really involves strong leadership in building that community to make that happen too. But you're so right in terms of starting early. If we can hit them in K and 1, and the research supports that 95% of students can be reading proficiently, then we're not going to have such wide gaps as we move on, and the magic can happen.
That's a really good point, because sometimes when I talk about this, people imagine trying to accomplish it across their whole elementary school, K-5 or K-6. And that can be overwhelming, and you may not have the resources to accomplish that. But if you concentrate your resources and do this sort of deployment of your resources flexibly in K and 1, you won't have to continue it. You can do the much easier for everybody to manage whole group decoding instruction in second grade. So that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we get there?
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about what a building might do in the beginning of the school year if they wanted to implement this model. Like, what kind of data would they need? What kind of teams would they have to get together on the table to make these kinds of instructional decisions? Who would be on the teams? How does this get started in a school?
Well, in my experience, you can either start with one individual teacher who wants to make a change, or you can start at the district level. You don't have to start at the district level. So what needs to happen is teachers and other educators coming together to look at screening and diagnostic data and engineer what their tiered model should look like for that grade level. It can be that simple. And it can be one teacher who wants to facilitate, spark that conversation just within their grade level. That's where it can start. But the components are teams of educators coming together, having good universal screening data, having diagnostic data, especially first grade and above, and identifying what are the barriers to getting better reading outcomes. If you ask any teacher, I sometimes do this exercise. If I gave you a magic wand, what would you change about your school? Right? Every teacher knows what the barriers are, what's in their way to doing what they need to do for their students. So that grade level team would surface, what are those barriers? What's in the way? Is it the schedule? Is it the knowledge? Is it the materials? Is it the grouping format? Is it resources? What is it that's in their way? And then they write action plans to resolve those barriers. That's it. I call that the problem-solving model. I think about it as the backbone that runs up the middle of that picture of a triangle, right? It's that deliberate use of data in a structured decision-making process to create the systems that students in that grade level need. Now, from there, you can expand out to other grade levels and to a building leadership team. Because as each one of those grade levels surfaces the barriers, they're going to run into things that they can't resolve themselves. They're going to need their school administrators to provide the materials or the training or change the schedule or create some different policy, right? So they're going to hit their heads up against something that the building leadership has to resolve for them. That's the job of a building leadership team, where you'd have representation from every grade level, from district office, from your parents and community members, from related service folks, that building leadership team's job is to remove the barriers for each classroom teacher. That's it. It's not more complicated than that. They're listening to each grade level team. There's a representative from each grade level on the building team telling them what they need. And the building team's job is to remove those barriers. Then at the district level, there's representation from each building, each constituency within the district, including parents and community members. And the district team's job is to resolve the barriers that the schools have identified, right? So maybe there's a policy that's in the way. Maybe there's some funding that needs to be allocated. Maybe we need an additional professional development day on the district calendar. The district leadership team can make those things happen. So they're sort of aggregating all of those action plans from each individual school in the district and resolving barriers to better teaching and learning. So hopefully I'm communicating that teacher within the classroom with their students is the nucleus of this work. They are the most important aspect of all of this. And everybody else's job is to just get the conditions right for the teacher to be maximally effective with each one of their students.
Yeah, that is really, really helpful. And at the Reading League conference this past October, I sat in on your session. And one of the things you talked about is oftentimes we give our universal screener and we screen to intervene. And I was like, oh, I love that quote, because we do. We screen to intervene. We take our data and we pick students out and say, you're an intervention.
Yes.
Instead of looking at the bigger picture and making those important database decisions based on what students are doing in your school and your class, and what kind of trainings do I need to give my teachers? What kind of changes do I need to make to my tier 1 instruction? So it's a whole system change for a lot of people in schools, I think.
And unfortunately, many of the state laws around reading improvement or dyslexia supports are causing this problem of exhaustion based on screen to intervene. They are requiring only identifying the students who are lower performing and giving them intervention. And yes, of course, those students need immediate action, but intervention is not going to be enough. You know, this concept of 30 minutes, 3 days a week or whatever, it's just not sufficient to catch students up. So I think we need to make a change there. And if I could influence folks who get to make those policies, I would do exactly what you said. Shift the attention to what percentage of students in my class, what percentage of students in this grade are low performing, and then respond accordingly with changes to curriculum and instruction. So I encourage teachers, if you have a PLC structure in your school, if you have any opportunity to meet as a grade level, that you use that data point every time you meet. You look at the percentage of students who were on track at your last screening opportunity, because that should frame your thinking. It should cause you to be thinking big picture. I can't be only focused on what's the intervention for Johnny. I have to think about the entire instructional environment that Johnny is learning to read in, and I have to influence every aspect of that environment, most importantly, the classroom reading instruction.
Yeah. And while you talk about the percentages, let's just name them in case people don't know, but tier 1 instruction should be reaching 80%.
Yes. If your tier 1 instruction is effective, the vast majority of students will get to your grade level reading expectations with no intervention, just as a result of high quality tier 1 classroom instruction. That's different. Some people think, well, with intervention and tier 1, we'll get 80%. Nope. We'll get 100% to those goals with intervention and tier 1. In order to shrink the number who need intervention to something manageable so that the intervention can actually work, tier 1 first has to reduce that number. So we use 80% as that general sort of criteria for effectiveness of tier 1.
Yeah. And oftentimes people who see that number, they assume only 80% of my students receive tier 1 instruction.
Oh, yes.
That's another confusion. But no, 100% of your students receive tier 1. It's 80% that tier 1 on its own has that effectiveness.
That's right. Good clarification.
And while we're talking about the data, can you also paint a picture of perhaps what might a sample goal look like for a classroom teacher or a grade level after they're looking at their universal screening data, just so they know they're making data-based decisions? Because some grade levels might say, oh no, we need a complete overhaul. We need to change a lot of things. But what might a specific goal look like?
Yeah. So keeping in mind, if you're using good direct universal screening measures like Acadiance Reading or Dibble's 8th edition, those benchmark goals for students are based on being the minimum level of performance. So what you want by the end of the year, as we've already discussed, is 100% of your students meeting those expectations. If you're starting, let's say in kindergarten, with these conversations of goal setting, it's not unrealistic to expect doubling the percent at benchmark in the first half of the year. So this is not based in research. This is based in my experience in working with schools. It's very common to be able to double the percentage. So at the beginning of kindergarten, 30% of your students are on track. The middle of kindergarten, you can expect 60% to be on track. And another maybe 25, even 30% by the end of that kindergarten year. Across the first grade school year, beginning to end, I definitely see schools doubling the percent at benchmark. This gets to be more difficult in second grade and above, and I don't see quite as large of a jump across a single school year. And when you get to third grade and above, it's really going to take more than a year to get every student on track because those students have established bad habits. They are not feeling great about themselves as readers at that point. They know they're different from their peers. And the gap is so much bigger. The amount of territory you have to go back and fill in for those older students is large. It's just going to take more time. So I don't have a real research-based way of helping people set those goals, but that's based on my experience, what I've seen, and hopefully that inspires people to think that they can actually get more progress than perhaps what they are currently getting. But it's maybe, as you said, going to take a complete overhaul. And not that you can do an overhaul overnight, but you can be planful about that. And I encourage people to think about what's the one thing that if we changed it about the way we do tier 1 instruction, one thing, if we changed it, it would impact other things on our list. It would have the least amount of change, something that's within our resources, that's doable, that would impact all the other barriers that we've identified. That's what you really want to focus in on and write your first action plan about.
That is really great advice. And I love your experience with the numbers and doubling, because some K1 teams might think that's very lofty, or they perhaps don't know what the percentage increases might be and what might be normal and what to shoot for. And why not be lofty? And then you can adjust for your next go around.
Now, there's actually research on that piece of it, that the higher expectations that we set for ourselves and for our students, the students are more likely to rise to that level. So if we set low expectations, they will surely achieve it. This has been shown in research. If we have high expectations, we're much more likely to reach it. So I agree with you. We should be lofty in our expectations.
Absolutely. So then say we make our goal, we implement our new plan, we see some changes. When should this team perhaps reconvene and look at the data again? Is this beginning of year, mid-year, end of year? Should it be more frequent?
Yes, I think it needs to be more frequent. I think grade level teams need to meet once a week. They definitely need more time to meet after each of the screenings. So some schools will do what they call data days, where they might have floating subs and each grade level gets 2 hours to meet or half a day to meet, depending on how much planning they need to do. So you might have longer sessions of planning after the 3 screening periods, but every week the grade level team needs to get together. So this is part of what makes the schedule challenging, because not just the teachers getting together, but everybody who's pushing in to support the differentiation of tier 1. So special educators need to be at that weekly meeting. Folks who serve gifted students, multilingual learners, the SLP, school psych, whoever is supporting that grade level should be part of that conversation as often as possible, because you're working through the plan. It's not like you have a single 45-minute meeting create a plan and then everybody's off and running. I wish it was that simple, but you're going to have to create that plan over a series of meetings. And then you're going to have to support each other to actually implement it, check in on each other, make sure that people have what they need to implement it, and then revise it as you are collecting progress monitoring data on the students who are getting that double dose of intervention, and make adjustments and tweaks over time to the groupings, to the coaching that each instructor is being provided to refine their instruction. So it's an ongoing, I would say, continuous improvement process that those grade level teams need to engage in. The building leadership team might not need to meet weekly. Maybe they do in the very beginning, but over time, I've found monthly meetings of that school leadership team is sufficient. Same is true for district teams. At the beginning, they might need to meet a couple times a month to get things up and running, but then just monthly would be sufficient.
Yeah. And teachers really have to be given time to do this important work. Oftentimes they're given a PLC and it's like, plan your class trip, collect the lunch money,
Yes.
find out, call the parent about a behavior issue. And administrators need to carve out time for educators to do this important work and for teachers to truly feel like the professionals and being able to make these decisions and crafting these plans together as a team too, I think is really, really critical.
I like how you framed that. It's honoring of teachers' professionalism for administrators to give them that time to get together. And the things that you mentioned, planning the field trip and whatnot, those are not trivial. Those actually need time carved out. And teachers need time to just chat and get to know each other and hang out, right? That's important because as you said earlier, it's sometimes uncomfortable to share students across the grade level. Teachers are used to owning their own students on their roster. And if you're going to establish this culture of sharing across the grade level, that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. You have to really establish that trust. And that happens in working together through using data, designing plans, implementing them together, evaluating them together. That establishes that trust. And I'll also say that in this age of technology, people can do the kind of communication that's needed in creative ways. They can set up ways of group texting. They can set up communication channels like a Slack thread where they are meeting virtually. They're communicating all the time about the students that they share so that that information is not waiting for the grade level meeting to be communicated. But as soon as you finish the lesson, you can share information back to that homeroom teacher. Hey, Johnny had this breakthrough today, and I just wanted you to know he's making this kind of progress, et cetera, et cetera. So using technology, I think, is part of the equation as well.
Yeah, that's one of the blessings of technology.
Yes.
I love how you mentioned that because we can make these data-based decisions and then we can also celebrate together. And I think that's part of it, the thing that makes it special as well.
Well, now that you've mentioned it, I'll just put in a plug for celebrating failures. I think in making these kinds of systemic changes, we have to recognize that this is not easy and that we are going to try things and we're going to learn from it. And we have to normalize that. We have to normalize the fact that we tried something and it didn't work out the way that we planned. So we're not discouraged to try again. So yes, celebrate the successes, but celebrate the effort. With our best ideas, this is what we thought we should do. It didn't really work out the way that we planned. So, okay, we're going to take a moment, pause and regroup, but we're going to try something else. That's a really important part of the culture that school leaders have to establish and cultivate, I think, in order to make these kinds of changes.
That's really important. It's like the little engine that could,
yes,
right? We're going to keep
absolutely.
plugging away. And oftentimes, you think about the failures and after the first attempt, then some teachers might think, oh, now they need intervention because what I did really didn't work. So sometimes that's still not the case. Sometimes it still means that your tier 1 needs some tweaking.
Yes.
And all this to say, it doesn't mean that a teacher is ever a bad teacher.
That's right.
Sometimes it's just the system that needs an overhaul. It's not the actual instructor.
Yes, that's right. Good point.
Instruction. And I'm thinking back to intervention too and these database decisions. So like when should intervention begin in a school year? And when should we focus on providing that double dose from the very beginning? Are we pre-identifying students from the previous year? Is there a certain time frame maybe we should give students in the beginning of the year to have them get adjusted into the tier 1 environment? Do you have any tips there?
Yeah, those are great questions. I have a real sense of urgency about this because I've seen too much failure. It's not acceptable. So I would say act immediately. As soon as you have screening data, even before you've collected your reading diagnostic data, you can squeeze some instructional information out of the screening and act immediately. And some students may need intensive intervention, even from the very beginning of kindergarten. So part of designing a tiered model is having that opportunity available for students who need it. These could be students who have been identified as having disabilities as preschoolers, or they could be students who just move into your district day 1 of kindergarten, but you acknowledge that they need intensive intervention. I don't think that we should wait and see at all. I don't think we should give students a couple of weeks to adjust to being back in school after a break or after the summer. No, I would prefer acting immediately and fading the support over time if you find out, oh, that student just needed a quick little reminder of what they were supposed to do. I would much prefer that because time is not on our side. We are running a race against the clock to get every student to be a skilled reader. And some students, by the accident of their birth, have more challenges than others. And we need to support that immediately, right away. So I don't agree with policies about things like, let's wait 6 weeks before we provide intervention or before we give a student tier 2. That kind of wait to fail has gotten us in the mess that we're in with the reading outcomes that we have. We need to act quickly and urgently.
Yeah, I love this sense of urgency. And I'm thinking back when I was a reading interventionist, one thing I would do is while still administering diagnostics, I would call them jumpstart groups.
Great.
And so I would have a couple of groups I still saw them every single day from the first week of school. And all my other time is when I had time to do diagnostics, because oftentimes I feel like the interventionists are tapped out helping with assessments, and then they don't start seeing kids for 6 weeks.
Yes.
Think about how much time is wasted if we can just have all hands on deck in trying to get the assessment piece finished so that students truly can get the services and supports that they need.
I love that. I see that all the time too. It's a month or so before the data are collected and students can get their intervention. That's a lot of lost time, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I like your suggestion of more efficient assessment, collecting the data efficiently. I'll also add that we have an opportunity to transition students across grade levels. So we're recording this as we're in the late winter coming into spring, which is a great time to start thinking about that cross-grade articulation so that the second grade teachers are meeting with the third grade teachers to explain what systems they've had in place, what the needs of those second graders are, so that third grade literally starts day 1 of the school year. Even before they've collected beginning of year screening data for the third graders, they are organizing themselves for third grade instruction and intervention based on the end of second grade data on students. So no wasted time. And then the second grade team is meeting with the first grade team so that they know how to organize themselves for the incoming first graders. That's been a really powerful step that many schools and districts have taken, so that there's a seamless transition to the next grade level. You shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. You already have data about what students need, what has worked and not worked, what's currently being used for the students. Let's communicate that to the next grade level so they can hit the ground running day 1.
Yeah, and oftentimes we think of that end of year data as summative, but why not use it as formative? And
yes.
Even if it changes a little bit over the summer,
Yes.
You still have a starting point.
Absolutely.
I'd like to touch on tier 3 a bit too in special education, because oftentimes schools have these meetings and you give students a plan and you wait until they fail the plan and then you send them for special education testing. And this seems to be the system of, now here's the special education teacher. What are you going to do differently with them? And it just seems to be a little bit of a flawed system as well. Can you talk about the MTSS approach in special education and tier 3 these supports as well?
Yes. What you mentioned as the flawed system is one of the reasons MTSS was originally conceptualized, because way back in the late 1980s, those were recognized problems, everything that you just mentioned. So MTSS is a deliberate alternative to that wait to fail, that try everything, and when nothing works, refer to special ed, and then the special educator has no idea what to do with the student. So in the MTSS model, some of the big differences include the fact that specially designed instruction, even delivered by a special educator, can be provided to students before they are on an IEP. So students on IEPs are served in all tiers, not just tier 3. And students who are getting tier 3 intensive intervention are not necessarily on IEPs. So part of the flexible service delivery aspect of MTSS is that special educators are part of this system of providing tier 1 instruction and providing tier 2 or tier 3 intervention. So the shift in the MTSS approach to eligibility for special ed is that you provide the specially designed instruction as part of moving through the tiers, so to speak. And if that specially designed instruction is what it takes for a student to make progress, and that cannot be maintained with general ed resources, that's when you suspect a disability. So the shift is that you have found what works. The emphasis is on enabling learning, finding what it takes for the student to make progress, not documenting failure. And when we have no idea what it takes for the student to learn, then we refer to special ed. No, that is not helpful. So this is mind-blowing to some people. They just can't even wrap their heads around what I'm saying. And it may be a whole nother conversation that we need to have, a whole nother episode. Again, it's one of the reasons MTSS was first conceptualized. And yet, even in districts where they say they're doing MTSS, I don't see this happening. I don't see this happening much. So we need to raise more awareness of this. But every educator can relate to what you said, that I'm just going to put it bluntly, special ed becomes a dumping ground. And I'm working with districts these days that are telling me they have 25% of their students identified on IEPs. That's outrageous to me. Absolutely outrageous. And it's a symptom of everything we've been talking about today. Not having a sense of urgency, not improving the effectiveness of tier 1, not working together across roles and funding sources and silos, not equipping teachers with knowledge and effective instructional materials. All of the things we've been talking about related to MTSS, if they are not in place and if they're not functional, it becomes a superhighway to special education. And special education does not become what it should be, which is the specially designed instruction that accelerates progress and catches students up to grade level expectations so that they no longer need the special education.
Wow.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how we should be operating.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the maintenance piece. Like, we found the solution.
Yes.
It's just a matter of they need this increased dosage. They need this dosage for the maintenance in order to make these strides along their educational career, rather than they're behind grade level and they're 2 years behind and they failed this assessment. They don't have letter sound knowledge and they're just low. And like you said, it becomes this dumping ground, which is a shame.
We've put the emphasis on documenting the failure instead of putting the emphasis into finding what works. We need to really make a change there.
And it becomes more of an asset-based approach. You look at what the student can do, what can you build on that to take them further along their path, rather than what they can't do.
Yes.
And we're talking about students with IEPs, but I'm assuming the same goes for your ELL students, for your gifted students.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In all aspects. So the grade level team would identify the needs of all students, all ends of the spectrum, struggling or advanced, and design the tiers to meet the needs of all of those students. So when we think about students who are gifted or English learners, I think those are the silos that are yet to be broken down. Those systems tend to operate very separately in districts. They tend to operate separately within schools. Even the personnel is very sort of segmented, but we need to bust that up. Frankly, we need to make sure that we're considering all students when we're doing the planning about what our tier 1 instruction should look like and what are the interventions that we need. So students who are English learners, students who are gifted, they may need tier 1 focused at their skill level and a second scoop at tier 2 or tier 3 from the very beginning of the school year, not waiting for them to struggle. So yes, that kind of coordination across the various entities who are supporting students in our school, that coordination really needs to happen as part of delivering this model.
It's a whole integration piece.
Yeah.
And this was all such insightful information. I am so grateful for you in clearing all of this up. And I know there's one thing we alluded to in the beginning of this episode, and I'd love to just touch back on it again, but I feel like we're at a tipping point right now in the science of reading community. At least it feels like in my circle right now.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many passionate teachers implementing structured literacy practices. They're immersed in their research. They're members of Reading Science Academy and the Facebook groups and reading all the books, and just they want to know better and they want to do better. And they may be more well-versed in evidence-based practices in terms of literacy than their administrators are. And when that happens, what's a teacher to do when they kind of have this knowledge base that's further along than their administrators may be, and perhaps their administrators aren't making the database decisions that they would want to make? How do we navigate this difficult area?
I am experiencing this right now. This is a real challenge, and it's an unintended negative outcome of those well-intentioned laws and policies around reading improvement and dyslexia. There was lots of effort about providing training to K-3 teachers, but not their administrators. So what you describe is definitely what I'm experiencing. So I'm not sure what it's going to take to make large-scale change. I don't hear administrator professional associations talking about this much. And I realize administrators have a lot on their plates and they have to know something about a lot of topics. But I also know that there's nothing more important than literacy. And I know that administrators share that goal for their students. So I think the best I can do for now is give you some ideas of what I've done personally and what I see teachers doing that I find is working right now. So these might seem like small steps. These are not systemic changes among administrators. These are small steps that I've seen work for teachers. One is finding a buddy. So don't try to make this change alone. Find a friend. Find somebody in your system, another teacher or somebody in another role who sees things the way that you do and wants to make a broader change. Okay, so get a partner. Get somebody so it's not just you going to the principal. There's two of you. And I don't mean in ganging up on the principal, but just having a partner who you can strategize with. And so that your principal sees that it's not just your harebrained schemes. There's more than one of you. Try to make what you are suggesting to your principal fit within the principal's existing goals. So don't make this change be something extra or something additional that they have to attend to. Find out what your principal is working on and concerned about. And that can be formally or informally. Find out what their goals are. Every principal has goals. Almost all of them have reading goals. The district requires them to have reading goals. Find out what they are and connect to the changes you want to make in your school to those goals. So it's not something separate. It's aligned with what the principal is already concerned about and working on. And then a third suggestion would be, rather than suggesting that your principal participate in some kind of a literacy conference, if they're willing to go, great, especially if it's easily accessible, like within your own state, go with them. That's fantastic. If there's a webinar that your principal would be willing to attend with you, fantastic. But many principals don't have time to engage deeply in that kind of learning. So small doses I've seen work really well. I've found this to be effective myself. Scheduling a regular appointment with your principal once a month, every other week, whatever they'll tolerate. And ahead of that meeting, and I'm talking about like a 15-minute meeting, brief. Ahead of that meeting, send them something to read or listen to. And I mean something like Would you listen to the 5 minutes of this podcast from minute 20 to 25? Would you read this paragraph from this person's blog or this article? Just this paragraph. And then when you meet, ask questions. Don't go in with all of your new science of reading enthusiasm and bulldoze the principal, right? You're going to overwhelm them. But just go in with questions. So when I listened to that 5 minutes of that podcast, it made me think about how in our school we do X, Y, Z. And it made me wonder, is there a different way that we might do things? Or when I read this part of the article, it made me think about how in my phonics lesson, there isn't any spelling integrated. And what do you think about that? Engage them in a conversation. You will become known as a knowledgeable resource. You'll become known as somebody who's helping that principal achieve their goals. You'll avoid what can sometimes happen, which is you become like a thorn in their side, like a little bit too much and a little bit threatening maybe and overwhelming. So those are my ideas. Get a buddy, link to what is important to the principal or central office person, and engage in conversations about small bits of learning across time. So those are my ideas. They might not seem sweeping enough or broad and general enough, but hopefully those are actions that people might be able to take and see a little bit of movement forward with engaging their school and district leaders on this urgent journey with them so that they're not hitting their head against their school leader as a barrier.
I love that. I actually love that you gave actionable steps. I was expecting a philosophical response. So, you gave a plan for us. And I think that's really important because no principal, no administrator wants a combative teacher or a teacher who's going to be diminishing their intelligence.
Exactly. They don't want to be confronted with all the things they don't know. They're supposed to be the leader and the expert, right? So yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So that is so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. We are going to be wrapping up this conversation, but before I send you off, is there anything that you want to share with listeners about MTSS, perhaps a mindset shift or just an action step in making it more successful in their buildings?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge all of the hard work and learning that teachers and other educators are engaging in. It's just impressive and inspiring, honestly. And I want to encourage you not to give up. And I'm going to push you. How about that? Because my message is that we don't have to accept the failure rates that we have around literacy in this country. I think that's what drives me. It's what frustrates me, that it's possible to get better outcomes for a much larger number of students. And so I want to inspire people to understand that they don't have to accept 40% of the grade level not achieving literacy, grade level literacy expectations. You can get a different outcome. There are some simple steps and actions that you can take framed within the MTSS model that will help guide you in getting a better outcome. And so I want to encourage people to take some small step to move in that direction. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm thinking of this one quote I love, and it's that common does not mean normal. And just because it's common, just because we have these atrocious numbers right now, it doesn't mean it's normal, and it doesn't mean it has to be our norm.
That's very good. Can I use that? I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll add to that these changes are simple, but that doesn't mean they're easy. And so that's why we have to band together. We have to get together in partnerships and in teams in schools to make this change happen.
Absolutely. And as we band together, where can listeners find you? Because I'm sure they're going to want to follow you on Instagram and join your membership and course and all the things.
Well, that would be wonderful. Being a member of Reading Science Academy is certainly the fast track to get my attention and support. I love interacting with the educators who are in the membership. I have a website, readingscienceacademy.com, and you can find all of the stuff about me there, my blog, past presentations, recordings, and so forth. I am the most active, I would say, on Facebook. Stephanie Stollar Consulting is how you can find me on Facebook. And on Instagram, it's Reading Science Academy. And just to make things confusing, on Twitter, I am Stollar6. So those are the places people can find me online.
Wonderful. And I know for districts who perhaps want your expertise around MTSS, your course is a great option if they want to get an understanding of how to get started without having you in the flesh.
Yes. I have a asynchronous online course for teams to implement MTSS. And it is full of details about everything we've talked about today and more, along with forms and processes. It really is meant for teams, grade level teams, school leadership teams to work through together. So that's definitely a place to get started. And Sarah Brown and I have recently finished a book called MTSS for Reading Improvement. It'll be out in May of 2025. So that captures all of the work that I've been doing for 30 plus years with districts and schools into one concise document. So I hope people will watch for that as well.
Yes, I already pre-ordered my copy and we will link all of that in the show notes.
Thank you.
So exciting. As you can see, Dr. Stollar is an expert around MTSS. So if you want to grow in your understanding and really have a more powerful system in your schools, I encourage you all to look into her resources. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an absolute joy. I really, really appreciate all your wisdom that you have to share on this topic.
Thank you, Michelle, for the opportunity. I appreciate the work you're doing and appreciate the work of your listeners as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.